I'm Tom Hopkins. I'm from the Fair Media and Jobs team as well. My day job is Curator of Aircraft at the Royal Air Force Museum. I'd just like to ask our panel to introduce themselves before I go back to Louise, who's got a very brief presentation for us before we start with some discussions. So can I ask you, Carly, to start, please?
Yes, hello. My name is Carly Randall. I am Archivist at the V&A Archive and Registry. I'm also Training Officer for the Section for Archives and Museums, which is a special interest group within the Archives and Records Association of the UK and Ireland.
Thank you very much. Jennie, please.
Hello, so I'm Jennie Lynch, and I am head of one of the teams in the Parliamentary Archives, the Preservation and Access team. The team works in cataloguing and accessioning and digitisation and digital preservation, as well as some collection care. So I kind of lead that team. I'd like to apologise in advance for my tech issues. I've put on some special sparkly lights on my bookshelf behind you, but this is me waving about, and I'm wearing a headset, which is the light you can see moving around. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennie. And Paula, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Paula Togher. I'm the Head of Information and Records Management at UK Parliament. My team is a team within the Parliamentary Archives that works closely with Jennie's team, and we help the staff of the administrations of Parliament manage their information day to day with a view to getting the information that's of long-term value into the Parliamentary Archives and managing and getting rid of the stuff that doesn't need to be kept forever, and helping and encouraging people to do that. That's me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So Louise, back over to you now.
Fabulous, thank you. So we thought that in terms of how to read a job description, what we wanted to do was make sure that everyone was starting from the same understanding of what a job description is and what you're actually looking at. So I'm going to share my screen again, and you should all be able to see a slide with some job description information on, and we just kind of want to outline what we mean when we say job description and what you can see on a job description. So job descriptions are basically split into three sections. You've got the header, which is what we're looking at here. That's usually in a box. The top level information that tells you the basics about the job. So what you'd expect to find here would be the job title, the salary, the location, hours, contract details, maybe holiday, things like that here in the basic section. Some things you sometimes see, but not always. It might be annual leave, who you're responsible to, who you might be working with. And other things like if there's any checks or notice periods they want you to be aware of up front. So that's the basics of what you'd see at the top of a job description. On the next bit of a job description, we've got the key tasks lists. And it might be called main responsibilities, key responsibilities, other similar language to that. And what you can see here is what they are prioritizing about the job. So what you'll be spending your time doing, what you'll be responsible for in an ordered list. They're usually in order of importance, in fact. So whatever's at number one, you know, is the most important thing to that organization. And there'll often be some kind of general things that would be in every job description for people who work at that organization. So on the example on the left here, you'll see number 9 and number 10, upholds the working values and expectations, carries out other duties relevant to the post. They're kind of generic job description lines that you'd see very often. So you've looked at the key tasks, thought about whether you're interested. The last thing for you to do is look at the person specification. And there's a lot of different formats for how you might see a person specification. Sometimes they're a completely separate document, which certainly adds some confusion to the mix as well. But they're usually structured something like this, either a list like the one on the left, or some boxes, but it's still basically a list, but a list with formatting, like the one on the right. And you'll usually see things described as either essential or desirable. And most of the time, they're in this kind of same order. You'll see qualifications at the top, experience, skills, knowledge, and then any attributes are usually at the end. So this is roughly what you can expect to see on a job description. And I think that's kind of the basics that we just wanted to make sure everyone understood, so you know what we're going to be talking about in the rest of this session. Tom, back to you.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to start with what is quite an open-ended question, I suppose, in some ways. And that is, what do you think the most important thing is to look for on a job description? And I'm going to ask our panel for any volunteers for that.
I'm happy to come in. The thing, from a really selfish point of view, the things I tend to look at first are location. Can I get there? Salary, is it something I can live on? And the workplace and what kind of place it is to work for. But when I'm writing a job description, what I'm trying to get across is a sense of what the day-to-day working might be like in a role and how this might interest the candidate. I don't always succeed, but I do try. And as a candidate, oh, sorry, I'm getting confused. What are my notes here? I'm also looking at the contract length. Is it permanent? Is it fixed term? And how long? You might be looking for a permanent job because that might be what the next step is for you in your life. For me, I've had a mix of permanent and temporary roles. I'm currently a permanent maternity cover post, and this is my third maternity cover post. And post maternity cover contracts can be a great way of getting experience in a post over a job that you might typically get in a permanent way. So there's something that's really interesting to consider, I think.
I think that's something that's very true, and maternity cover roles typically will attract less candidates as well. So it can be a really good route in, but worth saying it's not for everyone. Anybody else have anything to add?
Yes, I do. Being an archivist, we tend to have this threshold between unqualified and qualified records professionals. We're still an organization that's very focused on academic qualifications, and this is gradually changing, especially with apprenticeships. But something that's very specific for us is a job title terminology. So a job that's advertised as an archive assistant, that's going to be a role for someone who has not yet done a formal qualification in archives and records management, or who has not yet completed, say, an apprenticeship. Whereas an archivist, there's the expectation that you've either completed the course or you have many years of experience. And so that also helps give an indication about pay scales and about the level of responsibility. Another thing that I look at personally is how closely it relates to my continued professional development. I think job hunting and CPD and professional development are really closely linked. So if you at least have a very rough idea in your mind of the trajectory you'd like your career to move into, the kinds of skills that you want to develop, does this role offer you the opportunity to start with those skills, to gain them, or to perhaps develop what you already have in a new and interesting direction? So I think it's also very important to know the difference between the job role description and the personal specification, because the job role description is more, this is what you're going to get to do, whereas the personal specification section is, we expect you to be at this level. So I do take a good look at the job description, and I think, do I want to grow into this role?
I think that's a really important point, actually. I've seen some job descriptions and I thought, yeah, I can do everything there, and I've applied for it, and I've got that job. And those jobs have been the ones that I've typically found to be the least satisfying. And actually, it's the ones where I've looked at the job description and thought, oh, that's something that's a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I've gone for it anyway. And actually, I found that I've really been able to grow and develop in those roles. So I think that's definitely worth looking at. I think job title's an interesting thing as well. I think maybe it's more firmly delineated in archives than it is in museums. I'm going to take the typical example of curator, which in museums means literally nothing, but also everything at the same time. And that's why the job description is really, really important to find out what you're actually going to be doing. Because in a really, really small museum, as a curator, you could be doing the accounts, you could be doing the social media, you could be cleaning the toilets occasionally. Whereas in a larger institution, it can be much, much more narrowly focused. So really important to bear that in mind. Anybody else have anything to say? Louise?
Yeah, to be completely honest, the first thing I do is look at the job title and see if I think it sounds vaguely in the vicinity of something I want to make my next step. Then I look at the salary. If the salary is too low, I don't look at anything else. If the salary is acceptable, I scroll down to the person specification and look at the first 3 bits of essential experience they're looking for. I don't even really read the key responsibilities until I've looked at that person specification to see if I'm even vaguely in the ballpark of the right candidate for the role. Or if I'm sharking around for jobs for other people, if anyone I know is the right candidate for that role and I'm going to want to send it to them. So yeah, I just go straight to the person specification and see if it sounds like me or anyone I know.
Fantastic. Jennie, unfortunately, you can't put your hand up if you want to speak. So I'm going to encourage you to just go for it if you've got anything to say.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I guess from a personal viewpoint, kind of similar to Louise, really. I start by looking at the salary and decide whether that's a doable thing for me, and then the job title and I do actually start with the description to see whether it's something that interests me. So I'd also kind of want to, there's a lot of things that I agree with been said so far, and I do similar things. I would also back up what Carly said about the job description and looking at whether it kind of stretches me or whether it's the next step yet, whether it kind of fulfills some of my current experience or the aspirations of where I want to go and get experience, and how I kind of want to develop. I also agree with what Carly said about job titles in the archives field. It's quite easy to see a delineation in a career path sometimes with job titles, from archives assistant to assistant archivist to senior archivist to it's a common thing.
Yeah, that's great, thanks. And I think it's really useful to think about those sorts of things as well, as a sort of precursor to if you get invited to interview, because one of the questions that is going to come up is, why do you want this job? And an answer that's probably going to score you quite highly will be one that demonstrates that you can think critically about your career trajectory and wanting to learn and develop. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Definitely.
Are there any definite red flags for any of the panel in job descriptions? Louise, you're very quick to raise your hand, so I'll go straight to you.
I mean, this is fair museum jobs bread and butter, really. Is there a salary? If there's no salary, if the salary isn't numbers, jog on. I'm not here for that. I just want to see a number. I'll accept a range of numbers, but I will not accept competitive, negotiable. What's the point? I don't know if I can live on negotiable. I don't want to negotiate with you because you clearly you're not willing to tell me. So where is the negotiation?
Yeah.
I agree. I don't read job ads that don't have salaries on them.
Yeah, I've seen some where the sort of full-time equivalent salary has been put up, but it's actually for a part-time post and they haven't put the pro rata. I don't think you should have to get a calculator out to figure out how much you're going to be paid for doing a role.
I think you should definitely include both where you can, just to make it easier for candidates. What I really hate is when people get pro rata wrong and use it the wrong way around, and that's unhelpful. It's really basic. Just please get it right. And yeah, advertising for a post without salary is unacceptable for all sorts of reasons. And I also think it reflects poorly on the institution that does it. And it's one of those red flags, definitely. Do I want to work here? If they're not engaged with how to make their recruitment process more equitable, are they going to care about equitability in other areas? Any other red flags for anyone else?
I'd be looking at if there's information about who you'd be reporting to, not necessarily who is going to be your line manager, but is it someone who's working in the same sphere? Sometimes you can tell from the way a job description is written that it's written by someone who doesn't understand archives or museums. Maybe the job description is overambitious. Does it look like you might be making decisions or managing things without support? Again, if you're at a stage in your career where you'd be happy with that, that might be fine. But that can be quite stressful in early career, I found anyway. And thinking about who you'll be working to as well, they'll be setting your objectives or managing your work. Will they have realistic ideas about the amount of things you can do? Again, you could get a little bit of a sense of that through the amount of stuff that's written in the job description. If it looks really, really ambitious, you would wonder then, would the person that you'd be working with understand what's actually possible? And again, if you're in a role like that, you might be, or if you see a role like that, you might end up thinking that a lot of your post could end up being a lot of advocacy, trying to explain why you need to do things or why it might be difficult to do things. So they're one of the things that sometimes jump out at me as not always ideal, but it depends.
Yeah, I think when advocacy sort of takes over your role a bit, it can be a bit exhausting, but it's also a really important thing to do. So that's definitely one to watch out for. I wonder if anybody's got anything else before I move on to the next question.
I have something. I think to echo what Paula said about kind of long lists of activities and responsibilities, maybe I would also query kind of shopping lists of requirements in the essential and desirable skills, and be looking for kind of equally pitched levels of stuff that we're looking for with requirements, and a kind of something that hangs together nicely. So for example, say in the archives field, it's not massively common that you find somebody that, say, has systems experience with an EDRMS, as well as a collections management system, as well as a digital repository system. Maybe if that's what they're looking for, you question whether they know what they're writing for, or whether they've got realistic expectations again.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And I think in terms of the personal specification as well, there are all sorts of red flags for me. Credentialism is a big area in which Fair Museum Jobs campaigns. So the over-reliance of qualifications as a selection criteria, which I don't think is terribly fair. And also the number of personal specification, because if there's over 40, that's a lot. That's an awful lot, and it makes me think that it makes me worry about the HR know-how of the person who's put that together, because it's unrealistic, and it's also going to take ages to write. And do I really want to do that? I don't know. So thank you for those red flags. Conversely, Louise?
Actually, I want to pose a question from the chat, because I think this is potentially a red flag, and I think it sort of broaches between two of our questions. The heritage sector is really saturated. So I'll start a bit further down the question. How do I find out what the people posting the job mean when they use vague requirements, like you have to have broad experience working in, say, communications? Is vague specifications a red flag or not? It's a kind of question I'd like to pose.
Could it be a pink flag? Somewhere in the middle. What I would say is a definite red flag is if there's no contact details anywhere on the job advert, because it's really important somebody is going to be there to answer any queries you may have. And we've been speaking about this a lot, about how it can actually be a beneficial thing to put queries to the recruiter before you put your application in, just because it makes you stick in their mind more than anything else. But really, if it does feel vague to you, I would suggest get in touch with the recruiter, ask for clarification. Is it a red flag? I mean, it could be. It could just be thoughtlessness that happens to all of us. We're all overworked. We all make mistakes as well. So those are my thoughts. Anybody else?
Yeah, I guess it links in with a bit with what Jennie was saying about a shopping list, and it might be veering into that territory. And just to pick up on the last thing you said there, of job descriptions are often badly written. They might be written in a rush. They often won't have much contextual information about what the role might do or what the organization does. It might just list tasks and person spec, if even. So there can be those things as well, and something like that could be a red flag, or it could just be someone under pressure, but it's something that people would need to grapple with when they're either thinking about applying for the job or actually doing the application. They might not have as much information to go on.
What was the example of broad experience, Louise?
It said you have broad experience working in communications, was the example that the person in the chat gave.
Having never worked in communications, I wouldn't really understand what that means. I think if it was collections management, for instance, which is more my area, I think that would mean that you've done a little bit of everything. And my benchmark for that would be to go to the Spectrum procedures and see what's in there. That's a good mark for what is the all of collections management. But I think it does require a sort of pre-existing knowledge of the particular area that you want to get into, that you may not really fully develop until you're many years into your career.
I think I just want to reflect actually on the idea of a shopping list of responsibilities listed, because I think that comes into another question in the chat, which is any tips for spotting when a job description is written for a specific candidate? And I would say a weirdly specific shopping list can sometimes be an indication that there might be someone they already have in mind. This is not foolproof. It's not 100%, but it can be, in my experience, a little bit indicative.
There have been times when I've suspected that to be the case. I've never actually had any firm proof that that's happened. I don't know if people have at all. I'm not asking you to name specific examples, but is it a practice we think definitely happens?
It could sometimes happen when your HR department makes you advertise everything externally, but you might have an internal candidate in mind, and you may write the job. I have not done it, but you may write the job description in a very specific way, and so that might be why you would see them. And I would have, there would have been jobs like that I would have seen in the past where it kind of rang a little alarm bell, and then you end up finding out who got it, and it's like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've seen a few odd ones, certainly, asking for skills that really don't seem relevant to the role, and maybe that is what's going on. I'd still say it's always worth putting an application in, though, because even the process of writing a job application is a good exercise in its own right. I know it's hours of work, but it's not wasted, I would say. Anybody else got anything to add before we move on to our next question?
I was thinking that sometimes for me, an example of that might be if an archive or an organization has a specific specialism, say, I don't know, fashion or theatre, and they're looking for somebody with experience or a history degree in that kind of field as well, like that specificity of the kind of historical understanding of a collection, that might make me think that kind of people in the organization are already going to have that, having been working in the place. So that might kind of be another signal of that. I haven't really known it happen, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be very difficult. Again, I think it's another red or maybe pink flag, to be very specific about the exact kind of, say, academic background that you want for someone, especially in an archive, because as archivists, we move around so much. I've worked in museum archives, dance archives, Royal Medical College archives, religious archives, and I know there are people with even broader experience. And one of the sort of best things about those jobs is what I've learned along the way, and it's the interest that I've developed in that particular role that's been really, really valuable to me. So it is a shame when they, if they do put very, very specific degrees without a good reason. So, you know, unless you're looking for a very specific kind of skill, such as paleography, you know, reading old handwriting, that's very, very specific skill, which you might need certain qualifications in. But unless it really, really applies closely to the job, it does seem very, very, very unfair, I think.
I would say to that, Carly, though, that you could ask for skills in paleography rather than a qualification in it. It's just the qualification is a good way to demonstrate that skill, but other ways that you could.
Oh yeah, paleography skills or qualification, that sort of thing. It's a very, very specific kind of field. I mean, my background's archaeology, and I tended to sort of veer towards archives rather than museums. And I was asked, you know, why are you more interested in archives than museums? And that was a really, really good question, and it definitely made me think more about my career and made me realize that my interest moved towards records and systems. So the sorts of experience that someone may have, so archaeology degrees, field work, that I sort of parlayed it into a very, very different kind of direction.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting to work with different types of collection as well. My background's in classics, but I'm now curator of aircraft, so you know, I think that's testament to the fact that probably 75% of what I do at work is core collections management stuff that you can develop in any kind of particular area. I'm going to ask now if there's anything that you really like to see on a job description, something that is whatever the opposite to a red flag is. Louise.
Paid interview expenses stated up front, because that's not like it doesn't indicate to you what you can expect from the job, but it indicates to you that it's an organization who has thought about the fact that you're going to some effort to make applications. And I think that can't be overstated in terms of the working environment. And someone in the chat is laughing because, yeah, it's not common. It isn't. It should be standard practice, and it's disappointing that it's not.
Yeah, and lots of people in some of the other sessions were saying it pretty much was much more widespread before the 2008 recession hit, and it never really got back there. But I think we all need to keep pushing for it, whatever the future of interviews is, because obviously things like Zoom are taking over more and more. But I don't think real life interviews are ever going to go away. So yeah, having that knowledge up front is really good, and it means you don't have to worry where you're going to have to find 200 quid for a train ticket.
I think something we could all do as individuals in the sector is actually ask, say, oh, thanks for inviting me to interview. Can I confirm, will you be paying any interview expenses if you're being asked to travel? Because the more people ask, the more that sets a tone and an expectation.
Asking up front before the interview? I don't know if I'd be confident enough to do that, but
at very least, if they offer you an interview, yeah, I would ask at that point, I think.
Yeah. Okay. One thing I like to see is a closing date that is not going to move as well. We've seen quite a few examples of jobs giving a closing date, but saying if they receive plenty of applications, they reserve the right to withdraw it early. We've also seen some jobs that say it's open until they receive 100 applications. And I mean, just put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's applying for that job. You've put hours and hours of work in, you get ready to submit it, and then you find out that it's been closed. It's completely unfair. And people have got different things going on in their lives. Not everybody's going to have a big block of free time within the first week of of a job advert going live, and people, yeah, you could set aside time as well later on, and then find out afterwards that it's gone. It's just outrageous, really. Anything else that you really like to see?
I like when there's a description of the team or the working environment, and does it sound like a pleasant place to work? I mean, they might be telling fibs, but at least if they've put in the effort, I think, to put it in there, it can sometimes give you a sense of the team or colleague dynamics, and adds a bit of color to the job description and gives you something else to kind of give you a sense of what the job might be like or what the organization might be like to work for. And I also like to see an appropriate level of qualification, or not, as the case may be. I think it varies across museums, archives, and information management that I'm in. In archives, it's much more typical for people to request the master's, and for a person to be educated to degree level or whatever. In information management, it's a bit different. It kind of depends organization to organization, and you will see jobs advertised that don't require anything. No master's, no degree, just a couple of GCSEs essentially. It's a complicated balance and transition if our people are changing the way that they do them. But I like to see roles where, if a qualification is listed as essential, that it's backed up by what is in the detail of the job description, rather than low-paid entry-level roles that definitely require it, or that when it could, going by the description, it could easily be done by anyone, really. It's, a lot of the core skills behind a lot of what we would do when we first go into roles are customer service, or attention to detail, or being good at organizing things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thanks, Paula. I'm going to ask now if the panel have got any suggestions about ways in which you can tell if a job is the right level for you. I know we've sort of touched upon this before, but what would you look for to make that judgment from a job advert? I'm gonna start by saying something that I don't think is an appropriate measure of whether you're at the right level. I think this is something that I've been guilty of at the past, and that is salary. I've often seen a salary, and it's been quite generous, and I thought, oh well, that can't possibly be for me then, which is a really toxic means of thinking. But it's also unhelpful, because salaries are quite, well, they're generally depressed across our sector. We do have some organisations that pay much more generously than others. So I'd say never ever think that you can't do something just because it's got a good salary attached. But I wonder if anybody else has any specific measures of career levels that they look for.
For me, it's the first thing I read is those first few bits of the experience they're looking for, and that usually kind of gives me a bit of an insight into what level it might be at, which is why I go to that first, because it helps me benchmark, is this equivalent, a step up, too many steps up, just from that kind of first few points. I think that's where I go to find that information. And job titles, just to come back to that, and like, not meaningless. It doesn't tell you anything about the level of the job. Like you said, curator means 100 things. So job titles are definitely not useful to help you know that.
Yeah, I mean, the word assistant, for instance, can be applied across a whole range of things. I think the V&A has an assistant director. So obviously that's a very senior assistant at all. So those words can be useful. Don't rely on them at all. I'm wondering if sort of line management as well is something that people use as a judge of whether or not a position is at the right level for them. I know my experience, certainly, my current job has line management responsibilities with it, and it's the first job I've had with line management responsibilities. And I think that was one of the things that attracted me to it, because I thought actually I would quite like to step up to that next level and have a go at it. So yeah, anybody else have anything to add?
Can I ask you a question on that, Tom? How was that pitched on the job ad when you applied for it? Was it as a essential criteria that you should have line management experience, or was it kind of pitched as a?
It was. That's a really good question, and I think I only got it because it was pitched in quite a sort of liberal kind of way. So instead of asking for prior experience of line management, it was something like ability to coach, mentor, and lead and assistant. And I think that's really good open language to use. And obviously the previous example of direct previous experience is something I'd never have got. But the way it was worded allowed me to tap into things like volunteer management and things like delivering CPD to peers and doing things like this. Working on this summit, all of those things counted towards it. So it was a really good example of a way to phrase something that allowed somebody who had the potential to do it to step up, if not actual prior experience.
So that's good to hear from my perspective, because I think Paula might back me here, but as a practice in our office, this is something that we do try and do to appeal to people who want to take that first step into line management. We will say that there is line management as a responsibility, and by line management we mean actual like formal reporting, writing appraisals, forward job plans, being responsible for performance, etc. But we won't necessarily put that in the essential criteria. We'll put something in the desirable perhaps, which says experience of supervising volunteers or of coaching and mentoring peers, or so that you can show that sort of thing and you can use that in interview to demonstrate aptitude and interest, but not need the experience.
Yeah,
so that's something to look for if you're stepping into line management or you want to go that way. Definitely,
and that's really good practice. I had something that I was going to say and it's completely slipped my mind, I'm afraid. On that point, I
can come in with just something else on line management, which is the information records management sector is probably the less desirable twin of archives, and so often the competition for our jobs is a lot less. We at very entry-level roles we get quite a high volume of applications, but a lot of them are very speculative ones, particularly for somewhere like Parliament. But as once you get a couple of roles in, we get not that many applications for our roles, I would say. And so sometimes I might even have line management as essential, but I won't hold it. It won't let it hold me back from interviewing someone who doesn't have line management experience, because if they can, again, link it through to the kind of strands that you've touched on around coaching or working well with peers or helping someone's development, I'm still interested to see those things. And I wouldn't cross someone off straight away just because they hadn't met that particular criteria in the very specific way that I wanted. Kind of to link onto that, one of the things I was going to say about whether a job is right for you, this is less about the right level and more the right type of role, and it kind of links through to my team and where we work as well. So obviously we're within Parliament. We get a lot of applications that in the reasons for applying section will say, I love politics, or I really want to like help, forward democracy. And it's like, you will sort of do that in my job, but like really only in the most adjacent way. Like you might see Boris getting his sandwich, but that might be as close as you got to politics. And so it's reusing the job description to ascertain that, because I do say in my job descriptions, we don't work with members. This is like an internal customer facing role. I talk about the types of skills that you need and what the day-to-day would look like. And so someone who did a real close, it doesn't even need to be a close reading of the job description, would get that. And so it almost acts as a put off for me if someone talks about how much they love politics, because they're not going to get it from my post. And similarly, even though we're a team within the Parliamentary Archives, if they talk about, you know, how much they love working with old material, again, it's going to be a slight put off for me, because ultimately what they're going to be doing is on spreadsheets all day long, and we'll look at an old thing like once a month. So it's not a total write-off, but it just makes me think, oh, I wonder, is this going to fulfill this person in this post, as opposed to someone who can pull it round to, you can still mention politics and history, but you just need to pull it round to what would you get out of this role, and why do you want to work in my team?
Yeah, definitely. There's no escaping the spreadsheets, really, for so many roles in museums and archives and libraries as well. So thank you for that. Do you get access to the restaurant, Paula, or is that just for members?
There are some separate restaurants for members, but then there's restaurants that are open to everyone. And some people you can see, now that Theresa May isn't Prime Minister anymore, she likes to get her sandwiches every day from a particular cafe, so you can see her every day. But yeah, they have their own private dining as well that they go into, which we're not allowed into.
Sorry, a bit off topic, but I just really wanted to know. Thank you for that. Louise, I'm wondering if we've got any interesting questions coming through on the chat at all.
Yes, I've been typing away very considerably, and I think something that's really coming through is around, like, if I don't meet all the criteria, should I apply? If I don't meet all the essential criteria, should I apply? How important are desirable criteria? So maybe it's worth talking a bit around what does essential and desirable mean, and how much should we as applicants care?
That's a good question. You can definitely miss an essential criteria and still be appointed to a position. So the word essential is, I think, in almost all instances, it's a wrong word to use, and it should just be criteria that are more important than others. But to what ratio they're more important, I don't know. I wonder if anybody's got any thoughts on that.
It might depend a bit on the emphasis of the role. So something like, if you didn't have line management experience, it might be fine in some of the other posts in my team. Probably I would not have been appointed into my post if I had no line management experience, because I work in a team of over a team of 10. So it's looking a bit at the context of the role and where the emphasis is. Certainly I would and do interview candidates without all the essential experience. I wouldn't even count have they ticked off everything. And I definitely have appointed people who haven't met all the essential criteria as well. Where you will need to be ready to address that is in the interview, because your interview questions are likely to be based off the essential criteria. So you're likely to be asked for an example based off those. And so you need to then use some imagination to think about how you would pull adjacent strands of experience through to address that question, because that could then be your downfall in the interview.
I would also say that the word meeting a criteria, the phrase meeting a criteria, is quite black and white, and it's not binary, because applications are scored usually from between 0 and 3. So it's possible to if you phrase it right, to score a 1 for a criteria where you might otherwise score 0. So just have your best shot, really. And anybody else got anything to add to that?
I guess I'd echo what Paula said there about the kind of position of the role and some of the context. My more recent experience of archives jobs rather than information management jobs is we get a very large number of applicants for the early career roles. So it kind of is more important to try and hit as many of the essentials, especially as you can, from my perspective, just because of the sheer numbers of people that you're competing with. It's hard for me to sift you in if you don't and others do. So yeah, that's possibly a bit demoralizing for early career people on the archive side. As you get further through, as you progress into kind of middle career roles and more senior, that becomes less true because the numbers drop off.
I think I just want to reflect where Jennie has said that that might be demoralizing. Actually, the other way to look at that is it could be you. You don't know what the other applicants have. The likelihood is there won't be that many people who do meet every single criteria, and you are just as good or better. The best thing to internalize is that you are better than those people, and there's no reason you can't get the job. So everyone is very fixated on meeting every criteria, and it makes it harder for you to do your own job search. So do apply anyway. The worst that will happen is you've practiced applying for jobs, and that is something that gets easier and easier the more you do it. Although, yes, it can be demoralizing. You are still learning from every application that you do. Can I ask?
Nice turn there, Louise. That is also very true.
Can I ask another question from the chat? And this is particularly to everyone on the panel who has experience of kind of recruitment and shortlisting. When do you start shortlisting? Is the closing date meaningful?
Closing date is definitely, oh, sorry, go on, Jennie.
No, you go.
It's definitely meaningful for me. We have a system. About midway through, I might have a look, just see what the scene is like, but I won't be doing any scoring. We would definitely wait. I mean, we've got quite a robust HR structure in Parliament, so we would never do anything like close a job early anyway, or start doing anything meaningful before then. It will change organisation to organisation, but no, I don't do anything until I've got them all in.
Yeah, I agree. Our HR are quite, they have very formal and set processes and steps and rules, and we get a lot of advice and support from them, definitely. We would never close a job early. We don't really start sifting until after closing. We wouldn't be doing any marking or anything. And we definitely, the times when we extend closing dates would be because we've had a look with 3 days to go and there aren't enough applicants. Like just not enough at all. Maybe sometimes no applicants for some roles. So then we would be extending the closing date for that reason, and we have to go through a few steps with HR to do that too. So I guess the lesson there is if you see a job re-advertised with us, then apply because we're getting no applicants. So chances increase.
I can definitely say that from my organisation as well. Like if a job is re-advertised, it's because there wasn't the candidate they were looking for in the first go round. And actually, the job I do now was a re-advertising, and I didn't apply first time because I was a bit I don't know, and then I applied the second time and got the job with the information that it was likely the pool was not what they were looking for.
Is there a minimum number of candidates you would take to interview ever? I mean, if you only had one person you thought you could do the job, would you extend anyway to get a few more, Louise?
A recent recruitment at my organisation, there were 2 applicants and they interviewed and picked one of them. So they had 2 where they were like, yes, on paper, both of these people could do the job. We don't need to re-advertise, but we will interview both and then see where we're at.
I would echo that as well. Yeah, it's about whether you've taken a look at the very few applications, if that's what you've got, and whether they could do the role on paper. You would interview and close at that point.
Brilliant, thank you. Have we got any more questions coming through?
So we've just touched on, a couple of us have experience of jobs where there's only been 2 applicants, but someone's asked for a rough number of applications in popular roles. And I know this is very difficult because an average is almost impossible, because as Jennie and I both said, we've had experience with very small numbers. But another job in my organization, for a fixed term researcher post, they got 400 applicants.
Yeah, I think conversely, just to say how important location is, I think my role only received about 40 applicants. It's located in Shropshire, in quite a rural area, whereas jobs in London tend to have much higher numbers of applicants, and I think that's true in places like Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, Bristol, Manchester as well. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I would say that's true in my experience, and especially for the kind of early career roles. More applicants, as I've already said. Recently, we sifted 400. But I've also, in the last couple of years, recruited for a kind of mid-career collection care manager, and only had like 3 applicants. So, yeah.
I've got another interesting question from the chat. If we can move on to another one.
Mhm.
Have you ever decided to change your mind on the priority of criteria after receiving applications? And what would you do if you had a rethink of a job? What would the process be?
I don't think that's happened in my experience.
I think where I would have had to think about it is maybe where I've had very few applicants for a role. So recently, let's say 6 applicants, 3 were entirely speculative, like people who worked in banking or something, for quite a senior role in my team, and interviewed 2 people. One of them was someone who had didn't meet maybe 2 of the essential criteria. So it made me think, okay, what are the really key things I would like to hear from both candidates to convince me that they could do the job? And so it made me look critically at the essential criteria and think, like, what are the 2 to 3 key things out of that I really need good examples from? Whereas if I'd had a bigger pool, I maybe wouldn't have thought about it so much. I would have just been interested to see what the 6 or so people I would have interviewed had said to me. But it would be very hard for you as an applicant to know that, I suppose.
Thank you. We got any more questions?
Yeah. I'm not sure if no one on the right, or if no one on the panel has any experience of this, just indicate no, and we'll follow it up afterwards as a shared resource. Sometimes someone might get asked for a writing sample as part of an application. Any thoughts on what that means you're looking for and what to do or not do in a writing sample? If nobody knows, we're happy to take it offline.
I definitely applied and got a job. My first job in the sector, I did a writing sample on the day I was given a task and wrote something. To be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing beforehand. But if you were to do something like that, I would be looking at the job description. And let's say if I was asking for a writing sample for someone for one of my posts, it would probably be maybe an email that would be sent to our group of record officers. It would be mentioned who are local information management people in the organization. Record officers would be listed in the job description as a core group that we communicate with. So by looking at the job description, you could maybe pick out, like, what are the types of writing that might happen in this post, or it might be a slightly more formal answer to an inquiry from a user. Again, you could pick out what are the kind of bits of writing that this job will be expected to do, but it's a hard one to put your finger on if they're, yeah.
My only experience is being asked to do it on the day as part of a test, and in one instance it was drafting some interpretive text aimed at a general audience, and the other example was to respond to a freedom of information, hypothetical freedom of information request regarding oil sponsorship. That was at a major national museum. Anyway, any more questions?
I'm looking for some that are specific to talking about job descriptions and role descriptions. I've been answering some in the chat as we go along about, like, where to find jobs. So I've done a bit of a list of websites that you can use. There's been some talk about what someone asking for a PGCE might actually be looking for as well. We've talked a little bit around, does your location matter? So if you're looking at where a candidate lives, does that matter to you as the person reading the application? My personal suggestion was no, but you might get asked about that in your interview.
I have seen it on a job description before, in Northwest Scotland, but in my experience, it's only been asked to interview, and it's only been asked if it's somewhere relatively rural.
I've also had, rather than like, are you going to move for this job? I've had questions like this. I've been in an interview where I was asking this question. The museum is in the middle of nowhere and is not accessible by public transport. Are you able to get to the site? As a fundamental question, because it's crucial to that role that person knows that information up front, I think.
Yeah, and I like that phrasing again, rather than must have a driving license, because bicycles exist. So
I'm just looking through. And yeah, that's another, Paula's added a archives and records management jobs mailing list that also contains jobs, which I think is also very helpful. I think we've covered most of the questions that I think are appropriate to cover now, because some will be covered later.
I just saw one come up about previous salary and would that work against you? I know, yeah.
If you don't have to, if there's any way to avoid putting your previous salary, don't put it. Put zeros, put NA. I hate putting it on. It should not be used as a tool. It disadvantages already underpaid people. If you can refuse to put it, absolutely refuse to put it.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Thanks for that.
I think this is an aside, but I think it might be a field on our standard job applications in Parliament, but I don't see it as a recruiter, so it doesn't come through to me. So I don't know how, but I don't want to be on the record there because I'm not sure whether it's still on there. But I know when I applied for the jobs, I had to put in my salary. But I think when I applied for my recent job, I did, but I don't think it's there. And that's just links me through to one other thing, is that some organizations have blind recruitment as well, but you might not know that in advance. So again, in Parliament, I don't see the names of people who apply. I don't see what universities they went to. I just see the name of the degree if they have one. So all of that is taken out and made blind, which is good for everyone, but isn't something that you would necessarily know about in advance. So I don't know how useful that is, but it's just something to be aware of that people might not know about.
I think it's something that we're going to see more and more of, because there's so much evidence that it is just a really healthy practice. Yeah, I think that's a really positive development that will become increasingly apparent over the next few years. We've come to time, so I'm going to have to end it there. I'd like to thank all of the participants for coming, and I hope it's been a useful session. And I'd like to thank our panel as well for sharing their insights. So Carly, Jennie and Paula, thank you very much for giving up your Friday evening. It's been great to have you here. Love to stay and chat, but we're going to have to end the session quite abruptly. So everyone have a lovely weekend.